Okay. Jefferson County Court at Law number 2 is back in session. The court is in session and calls numbers M331242 and calls number M331244. Both cases are styled the state of Texas versus Matthew Joseph Bailey. Let the record reflect that Mr. Bailey is present in the courtroom, and let the record reflect that he is present with his attorney Glenn Crocker. State is present with Assistant District Attorney Andrew Hubel and Attorney Sarah Staub. Let the record also reflect that the jury is not present in the courtroom. Mr. Crocker, do you have a matter you'd like to bring to the attention of the court?
I do, Your Honor.
And what is that matter?
Your Honor, expediency. I know the state, or I anticipate the state will be calling the blood analyst as a witness today. As the court, the state is aware, the court has a standing order regarding discovery on production of blood testing results, and it has a number of items that the court requires without motion to be produced. This was a long-standing issue in this case about the production of these matters. I will represent to the court, it had nothing to do with it. He's relatively new to this case. In fact, there were several emails, letters, phone calls sent out about, can you find this stuff? Can you find the things? And essentially they said, we've turned over what we've got. I don't want to get in a situation that we did yesterday whereby, at least my interpretation of the testimony was there's some paperwork that maybe the officer had that didn't make it in the state's discovery responses. The state didn't have access to it because the officer gave it to some other entity. What I would like to do is be able to present the court's standing order for these blood testing results to the expert to make sure that they understand what was required to produce, and ask whether they were, and have an opportunity to ask the expert whether they know about this order, whether they were asked to produce these matters.
So it's a discovery matter. So Mr. Hubel?
Does it sound ordered? Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Hibble?
Um, the state would like to make the point that a more appropriate time for this objection would have been prior to trial. That being said, since with the motion being signed and it being sent to the lab at that point, it would be this question would be appropriate for the for representative of the lab to answer. So I suppose we can call Ms. Altamirano in for Ms. Rucker's questioning.
I mean, okay. The way this motion reads, and I'll just read, let's see, it says, it's follow that any items herein not produced in violation of this order shall be and or excluded from evidence in this case if offered by the state. And so I think what Mr. Crocker is saying is like a motion to suppress the evidence to be, in order for it to be excluded.
That may be the ultimate result, Your Honor, according to whether the court deems that to be the appropriate remedy. My immediate concern is this. For over 7 months, I've been asking the district attorney's office for the documents and the test results and the things that are required in the court stating order. And the response I get from the office is, hey, we've given you everything. What I don't want is for the state's witness to get up there and I'll show them this document and say, did you have this? Did you have this? Did you have this? And
Okay.
yeah, no one asked me for it. Prefer that be done out of the presence of the jury.
Okay, okay. So what we'll do is, is the analyst here?
The analyst is here, Your Honor.
Okay, so what we'll do, Ms. Bailiff, Everyone may be seated. Jefferson County Court at Law number 2, back in session. The court is in session and calls numbers M331, 242, and calls number M331, 244. Both cases are styled the state of Texas versus Matthew Joseph Bailey. Let the record reflect that Mr. Bailey is present in the courtroom with his attorney, Mr. Glenn Crocker. Let the record also reflect that the state is present, the Assistant District Attorney, Attorney Andrew Hubel. Let the record reflect that the jury is now present and seated in the courtroom. Defense, are you ready?
It's ready, Your Honor.
State, are you ready?
State's ready.
Okay. Mr. Hubel, you may proceed. Your witness have been previously sworn in.
Thank you. Morning, Ms. Altamirano. Can you introduce yourself to the jury?
Sure. My name is Melia Camila.
What is your, how are you employed?
I am a forensic scientist for the Jefferson County Regional Crime Lab.
And how long have you been working there?
Approximately 15 years.
Can you give us your education background?
I have a bachelor's in biology.
And certifications, training, experience that you have?
Right. So I am licensed by the Texas Forensic Science Commission in blood alcohol. I'm also trained proficiency testing and competency testing. The proficiency test is every year, and I was externally and internally trained.
So you have a wide variety of specific training in regards to blood alcohol toxicology.
Yes.
So have you testified in this area before?
Once before.
Was it in this county?
Yes, in this county.
So you're a licensed blood alcohol toxicologist.
Yes.
What is that licensing process?
So the licensing process entails taking a test, kind of like a board exam. And after that, you have to have continuing education. Every 2 years, you get reevaluated to make sure that your continuing education is still adequate.
Okay. And when were you first licensed?
2019?
And do you recall, like when you last re-upped your licensing?
I'm actually due this year, I think in October. So I will be re-upping that pretty soon.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes, you may.
I'm showing you what's marked as state's exhibit number 3. Now, do you recognize this?
I do.
Okay. Can you tell me what it is?
It is a blood kit from BPS. It's a BPS blood kit.
Now, so on the side here, there's a label here that reads expiration date. Can you read that?
Yes, December 31st, 2021.
Now I'm opening what's marked as State's Exhibit 3. Can you tell me what's contained in State's Exhibit 3?
Yeah, so we have two blood tubes, in the two blood tubes, and then inside those tubes are 2 vials, one in each blood tube.
I'm going to hand you one of the vials so you can
Okay.
view its content. And inside is one of the blood vials, correct?
That's correct.
Now, how do you recognize it? Do you have any identifying marks on
I do. I have my lab number, the letter I gave it, and my initials.
Okay. Do you also have the individual the name of the individual whose blood is drawn on the tube?
Yes.
Can you tell me who that individual is?
Matthew Bailey.
Okay.
You want this? Yeah.
Yes, please. Now, in reviewing the tube, did you notice any reason to believe that the tube or its contents were tampered with in any way, other than for the purposes of your examination?
No, so those blood tubes are sealed with a vial label, and whenever they come into my hands for analysis, I notate if the seal was present, and if it wasn't, then I would notate that also.
At this point, state whatever state exhibit number 3.
No objection, Your Honor.
No objection, states exhibit number 3 will be admitted.
Now, when you receive the blood from law enforcement, where do you store it?
It's stored in a refrigerator.
Okay. Now, upon testing these samples, you retrieve from the refrigerator.
Yes.
What do you do after that?
So the way my process is of analysis, the day before, I go ahead and assign all the pieces to myself, check out all the evidence. I prep, meaning I check the label, make sure it matches with the name and the case number, the seals. The following day, normally, I will actually do the analysis. Meanwhile, whenever I do have to store these vials, even though they're in my custody, they go back into the refrigerator.
Now, can you explain generally what kind of tests you would run on this blood sample?
Yes, so we use an instrument called GCFID, which stands for gas chromatography with flame ionization detectors. And basically, what the instrument is designed to do is to, in a mixture, to pull out the volatiles. Those volatiles go into an oven-like, we call it a column, but it's like an oven. Whenever the samples go through the column, the samples get separated, and if any ethanol or any other volatiles present, it will be detected by our instrument.
Okay. So you would use this method to analyze the blood and determine the blood alcohol content?
Yes,
Okay. And this equipment, you work for the Jefferson County Regional Crime Lab, correct?
yes,
Was that lab accredited at the time that this test took place?
yes,
And is it still accredited?
yes, we've been accredited since 2005.
Now, the instruments that you use, could you once again explain what they are and then also say if they were operating properly at the time of testing?
So the instrument, the way we check that is operating properly is we run a calibration curve with every batch of analysis that we have. And that ensures that the instrument is working properly throughout the whole analysis or the whole one.
Okay. And you discussed this a bit previously. Is there a protocol for testing the blood using that instrument?
Yes,
And did you follow that protocol?
yes,
Now, following that testing, did you get results from that testing?
I did.
Do you recall the results of that testing?
Yes, I have more here.
May I approach your honor?
Yes, you may.
I'm showing you what is marked as State's Exhibit 4.
Okay.
Is it must be 5, huh?
Yes, Your Honor. My apologies. What's marked as State's Exhibit number 5? Do you recognize it?
I do.
And can you tell me what it is?
It's a report that I generated after my analysis.
And the, that report has the results from that test, correct?
Yes,
And the results listed on that test are, the same as you remember from the day. This is the same test result. It wasn't altered anyway.
yes, same test results.
Okay. Can you tell me what the result of that test was?
It's 0.142 plus or minus 0.010.
At this point, state without for, states 5.
No objection to 5.
No objection, stage 5 is admitted.
Okay. Now, can you explain what those results indicate?
It indicates that at the time of testing, this number is above the legal limit of 0.1.
And just as a general reminder, can you say what the legal limit is?
0.08.
Now, you can't, now you can tell me what the blood alcohol content was at the time of testing, but you can't speak to what the blood alcohol content was at the time of the offense. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you briefly explain why that is?
So I don't have any information on, aside from the fact that there were 2 hours that passed back from the time of stop to the time of collection, and that the individual was a male. I don't have any additional information on this person, so I can't create any type of detailed numbers for that person. So the only thing I can do is give you a general statement. And normally, what the research has shown is that
Objection, Your Honor. I'd like to take a witness on void there. She's got to talk about extrapolation.
Okay, you may take a witness on voir dire.
You want to do it out in the presence of the jury?
Oh, we can. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there's a matter that needs to be taken outside of your presence. So would you please follow the bailiff into the hallway? Defense, are you ready? You can get the jury back in. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that the court is back in session and calls numbers M 331-242 and calls number M 331-244. Both cases style the state of Texas versus Matthew Joseph Bailey. Let the record reflect that Mr. Bailey is present with his attorney. Attorney Glenn Crocker State is present with Assistant District Attorneys, Attorney Andrew Hillel and Attorney Sarah Staub. And let the record reflect that the jury is now present and seated in the courtroom. Mr. Hillel, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
State and defense, are you ready?
Ready, Your Honor.
Mr. Hillel, you may proceed. The witness is yours.
Thank you, Your Honor. So without getting into any hypotheticals about extrapolation, you're simply saying that you cannot testify specifically to this individual's level of intoxication at the time of the offense because there are too many variables that you are not yourself aware of.
Correct.
No further questions.
Okay. Mr. Crocker?
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to hand you State's Exhibit number 5. I believe you just identified that as that's your report.
That's right.
It's supposed to be notarized. You see that on the bottom? Was it?
It should have been notarized, yes. So there's, if I look at my copy. So I have my copy, which is notarized, and I can cover that for you. Yes.
Do you have any explanation how a non-notarized copy ended up in the state of Texas file and ended up in mine?
I'm not sure. Usually whenever I write my report, that copy gets printed, before it goes for review. And once it goes through the full review, then it gets notarized as the final.
Would it be? The state's Exhibit 5 and your notarized copy, are they identical?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Aside from the lack of notarization.
Correct. And maybe also that, that copy was obtained through a portal that we have, where we file all of our, electronic copies, but the actual notarization needs to be written on, which is right there.
When you get a blood sample into your possession, there is a chain of custody, is there not?
There's a chain of custody, yes.
Essentially says for laypersons, this is where the sample came from and the path that it traveled arriving to me.
So the chain of custody states, starts for us, it starts from the time the person submits the evidence to the time it gets reached from our lab.
Right. And the person that is submitting the evidence, it's not the citizen, it's law enforcement.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So you had mentioned that there was a 2 hour gap between collection or between, arrest and collection.
Yes,
Did you find that 2 hour gap pursuant to a review of the records?
meaning,
How did you determine there was a 2 hour window?
I looked at the submission form, and on the submission form, there's an offense date and time, and then I looked at whenever the nurse or the medical personnel, drew the actual vial, they'll go ahead and put the date and time on there also.
And if we were to ascertain in this trial through other witnesses that that window was actually 3 to 3.5 hours because of what's been described as a typo, does that change any of your results?
No,
Doesn't change your opinion either, correct?
if it changes my opinion as to whether the number is above, no.
All right. Do you have any idea as to the condition of contents of these blood draw vials prior to having blood put in them?
No,
Okay. Do you have a rudimentary knowledge of what is to be contained in these vials?
when they're empty prior to the actual collection, yes. So these vials tend to have a preservative and an anticoagulant in it.
And once the collection is made of the sample, I assume the sample is sealed and signed or initialed by the collection person or entity, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and then handed over to a law enforcement official, correct?
I would assume so, but that seems to be the path.
One more time.
I think so. I'm not sure 100% how it gets from from the collection to law enforcement.
Is that not on the chain of custody form?
No, the chain of custody just contains, as soon as it gets submitted to our lab, what happens during that duration, from the time of submission to our lab to the time that I release it. So anything prior to that, I wouldn't know.
Do you have any knowledge of how long this sample was at the Groves Police Department?
No, I do not.
Okay. How are these samples supposed to be stored?
Ideally, we store them in the refrigerator, but room temperature is also acceptable.
Room temperature is acceptable? Room temperature for 9 days is acceptable?
Yes, as long as the preservative is there, it should be fine.
Do you know whether the Groves PD refrigerates your samples or not?
I don't.
Would there be anything or any information you received indicating that?
No,
Why is it important to refrigerate these samples?
it prevents microbial growth.
Microbial growth does what to the sample?
It could potentially degrade the sample depending on it can potentially degrade the sample.
It could skew the results too, couldn't it?
If there's a true microbial growth, yes.
Okay. And you don't test for microbial growth, you just test the sample, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So you have to assume by the time the sample arrives at your desk that it's been handled properly.
Yes.
There's no documentation that you receive that indicates otherwise.
No, and normally whenever I get the samples, I'll look at the blood vials and make sure that they're not clotted or that the color is still, it's not green. And even when testing, I go through, and if there's any type of information on that, then I'll go ahead and do the correction.
Do any of these contaminants that you testify to, in fact, promote microbial contaminants? What microbial contaminants?
I'm not sure, but it's hard to to say, that a blood vial gets a microbial contaminant because of the preservative that's there. So I'm not sure what exactly you're referring to.
Well, I'm just talking in general, you said the microbial contaminants could be in a sample and it could skew the results. I'm asking what type of microbial contaminants?
So one of the most arguably, or commonly used is one called Candida albicans. However,
Can you say that again for me and the court report?
right, it's Candida albicans. However, in all the decades of research that they've had, they've proven that it's very, difficult to actually get that microorganism in a blood vial.
Okay. Are there any other microorganisms or contaminants that could be in these blood samples?
That's the most common one, that I've heard of.
Mhm. But the question is, are there any others?
I'm not sure.
Would the collection procedure have an effect upon the sample?
Meaning from the nurse or, as far as like whether there's a contaminant or
Yes.
I'm gonna say as long as, they're actually using, the proper techniques that it doesn't.
And are you familiar with proper techniques?
It's usually, I'm not exactly familiar, but I know that they have to clean the area, allow it to dry prior to actually, obtaining the sample.
Do you test your samples for any microbial contaminants?
I don't.
What is the purpose of having two vials instead of one?
So the second vial is, reserved for the defendant, if that person chooses to test that vial.
Okay. So if a citizen wanted to test a vial, how long do you retain these vials?
I don't retain them, past my analysis. So as soon as I'm done with the vials, analyzing the vials, they go back to the agency,
Go back to the arresting agents,
to the submitting agency.
submitting agency,
Mhm.
which in this instance would have been road speeding.
Yes,
Okay. Are you giving them any special instructions on how to store this?
I'm not.
You'll tell them it's preferable to refrigerate or keep them at room temperature, throw them in a locker, keep them in a dark area, nothing like that.
I know.
Is it true that the preservatives contained in the vial prior to the sample being put into the vial has a preservative?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the vials prior to having blood placed in them have a preservative.
Yes, so they're supposed to have a preservative and an anticoagulant.
Okay. And so the preservative is supposed to essentially put the blood in some form of stasis, so it is in fact representative, or the sample is representative of the condition in which it was collected.
So the preservative is supposed to prevent, anything from actually contaminating the blood, yes.
Does the preservative prevent fermentation?
It's supposed to, yes.
Okay. So it's supposed to,
Mhm.
does it not all the time?
Well, I don't know. It's created, it was designed for that.
Okay. And if the preservative within the vial was compromised in some fashion, that would affect the analysis of the blood by the time it gets to you.
In what terms?
Degraded, absent,
You mean if there's an ethanol concentration there, would it increase it, decrease it, or?
does the lack of preservative or the lack of the required amount or the lack of the specific, and I'm going to use layman's term, strength of the preservative,
Mhm.
if it's degraded in some form, does that affect the sample by the time it gets to you?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I think common sense would tell me, I think it would. It's there for a reason, correct?
Yes, it's there for a reason.
It's at certain levels for a reason, correct?
I don't know what the levels are.
Okay. What would you say about a sample that had no preservatives in it?
In terms of whether the analysis was correct or not. So there have been, like I said, research in which, they tested blood tubes, blood vials without the preservative, and, microorganisms don't grow it. So meaning, or, ethanol concentrations don't just magically appear. A lot of the research that has shown any type of microorganism has been because they were purposely inoculated or injected that vial with and without a preservative. But in this scenario, I would assume that nobody wanted to inject microorganism into vials.
Are you familiar with the storage requirements of the collection vials?
The recommended would be to store them in a refrigerator.
No, hang on, let me make sure you understand my question.
Okay.
Vials prior to having a sample put in them,
No,
you're not familiar with those?
no, because they're sterile, because the preservatives are there, I don't know that they have requirements.
Okay. That's what the state made.
Mr. Hill?
For the keeping of blood samples for your subsequent testing, room temperature is acceptable.
As long as the preservative, they're ideally, refrigerated samples, are.
And generally that preservative is present.
Generally, yes, all these, gray top tubes should have that preservative on there. It's already in there.
And like, during your testing, if there were, you would list in, I forget what document that you called it, but you would list any problems that you saw with the blood in that document.
Yes, my document is called the worksheet, and my analysis worksheet. So if there were any issues, that I noted, with the blood vial, whatever, if it was a different color than the average or the normal, or if it was clotted, or if the vial label wasn't there, I would have notated that on my worksheet for sure.
And whether there was a 2-hour window or a 3-hour window, you had said that that would not change your results or opinion regarding the sample.
It does not change my results.
And you talked about a specific contaminant. It's that you called arguably the most common, and that one is still exceedingly rare.
Right, so it's the one that I'm familiar with, and then, yes,
And you can testify that the defendant's blood alcohol content was 0.142 at the time of your testing,
yes,
which is higher than legal.
yes.
No further questions, Ms. Snell?
Mr. Parker?
No further questions, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
And Mr. Crocker?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony. You may be excused. Now, one of the attorneys may want to call you, but if that happens, make sure that you are available
Okay,
by phone. You don't have to stay around the courthouse or anything.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank
All right. You have a blessed day.
you too.
State, you can call your next witness.
This time, state with rest.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, state is arrested. Mr. Crocker?
Your Honor, I'm going to waive our opening and call our first witness.
Okay. You can call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. I call Jeff Francisco.
Cisco?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Cisco? You can come forward. Ms. Cisco, would you please raise your right hand? Ms. Cisco, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may put your hand down, Ms. Cisco. She has to change the mic cover. Once she's changed the mic cover, you can have a seat in the jury, on the witness stand, and you can adjust the microphone.
Proceed.
Mr. Crocker, you may proceed.
Ma'am, please state your name,
Jennifer Cisco,
and can you spell your last name?
Fisco.
Okay, and Mrs. Cisco, what is it you do for a living?
I am a medical laboratory scientist.
Okay, and please, let's talk about your education first. Do you possess any degrees?
Yes, I have a Bachelor of Science degree in medical laboratory science.
Okay, do you have any certifications?
I am certified by the American Society of Clinical Pathology.
Okay, and what does that certification entail? What do you have to do to get that certification?
You have to go to a NACLS accredited school. You also have to pass their board of registry exam, so it's like a nursing exam, but it's for laboratory scientists, and it states that we are board certified to perform laboratory tests.
Okay, and are you employed?
I am employed, yes.
And what is it you do for a living?
I'm a medical laboratory scientist at First St. Elizabeth Hospital in Vermont.
Okay. Prior to coming to court today, have you testified to court before?
Yes,
On how many occasions, to the best of your knowledge?
give or take 10 cases so far.
Okay, and have you been qualified as an expert in every one of those 10 cases?
Yes,
Okay. Now, Mrs. Cisco, you've been retained by Mr. Bailey and me to review the state's blood analysis in the case in full, correct?
correct.
Okay. Were you present when the state's analyst testified just moments ago?
Yes,
Okay. I'm going to start from the very beginning. May I approach you?
Yes, you may.
And I'm going to hand you what's marked as State's Exhibit 3. I represent to you and to the court for the record, those are previously admitted blood vials. Are you familiar with those type of vials?
yes, I am.
Those type of vials commonly used in the collection of blood specimens,
Yes, they are.
specifically in criminal prosecutions.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in your review of this case and getting prepared for your testimony, do you have any commentary or concerns about the vials?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
In reviewing the information that I was given, it states, or it's been made known that the blood collection tubes are kept in the officers' vehicles, which is not the proper collection or storage requirements for those blood tubes.
Okay, so let's make sure we understand. I'm not talking about the sample. I'm talking about the tubes prior to having a sample placed in them, correct?
Correct.
All right. What is the accepted practice of storage for these tubes?
The accepted practice is room temperature only. The reason for that is because these tubes have a vacuum seal. They also have preservatives in them. If for any reason they go out of the normal collection storage requirements, those preservatives can be rendered inactive. Also, the seal on the tube can fail, which could cause contaminants to enter into the tube themselves.
You would recommend placing a tube of this nature in the back of a patrol car in August in Southeast Texas, would you?
No, I would not.
Okay. So talk to me about the effect or the potential effect of the vacuum seal issue. What is the problem with that?
So if the vacuum seal is not sealed or is
altered in any way, it can affect how much of the blood is able to be drawn into the tube. It can also allow contaminants to be entered into the tube because the seal, which is just a rubber seal, if it's exposed to, differing temperatures, can expand or shrink, which causes the seal not to work.
Is there anything that a person can do prior to putting a blood sample in these tubes to ensure the integrity of this seal?
The only thing that they can do is keep them at room temperature per the manufacturer's guidelines.
So visual inspection isn't sufficient.
You're not going to be able to see if the seal is ineffective unless it is completely coming off.
In addition to the seal issue, would the improper storage of the vials can affect the contents of these vials?
Correct.
All right, so explain to the jury what is contained in these vials from the manufacturer.
So these tubes have an anticoagulant, which is called potassium oxalate. It essentially just keeps the specimen from clotting. They also have sodium fluoride, and that is supposed to be a preservative that's supposed to inhibit microbial growth.
Okay. Is there any way to know from visual inspection if the inhibitor or the anticoagulant is in the correct amounts?
Not just by looking at it.
What would you have to do to ensure that?
You would physically have to open the tube and measure it per the standards of the manufacturer.
And you heard the state's expert testify, and did you hear her say she did that?
I did not hear her say that one.
And it was impossible for her to do that because it already had blood in it, correct?
Correct.
All right. Microbial contamination. You heard the state's expert testify that there's one more common than the others. Do you agree with her testimony?
I do agree, yes.
Okay, and can that affect the integrity of the blood sample?
It can affect the integrity of the blood sample, yes.
And can it skew the blood sample results?
Yes, it can.
Okay. Is there anything about this potential microbial growth that would permit some type of fermentation?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question again?
Is there anything about this contaminant that would promote or not allow fermentation?
The contaminant actually will promote fermentation to happen.
It
And
promotes
produce-
it.
Yes.
Okay. Explain to the jurors exactly that process if you can.
Okay. So the microbial that they're talking about is Candida albicans. It is a natural skin flora. It's on everybody's body, along with other things such as strep and staph. Everybody has it on them. If it makes its way into the blood tube via improper collection of the blood samples, it can essentially feed on the sugars that are in the blood itself, cause fermentation, and produce ethanol in the tube.
And for us laypersons, ethanol is,
Alcohol.
and that would be referenced, or and that would show up in a gas chromatograph test.
Yes, it would.
And it would not be an accurate representation of the blood alcohol at the time of collection, correct?
It would not, no.
And there's no way to undo that, is there?
There is not a way.
Now, the expert said the reason there's two vials is so the defendant can test it.
Mhm.
If it's contaminated, he's just testing a contaminated sample as well, right?
Correct.
With respect to the vials, not the sample contained in the vials, are there any other concerns you have regarding these vials when you review the file?
As far as like handling or?
Yes.
Yes, I do look at the date that the specimen was collected, the date that it was submitted to the lab, Also, if there were any special handlings as far as if it was refrigerated, non-refrigerated, how long those.
And does the time frame of collection to submission of the lab or testing 9 days concern you?
Very much so, yes.
Why? Tell the jury why.
Blood samples ideally should be refrigerated. Ideally, they should be tested within 4 to 6 hours of collection, if possible. If not, that is why we refrigerate them to help preserve the integrity of the sample. The longer that the sample is left unrefrigerated, it just creates more issues as far as, especially if there's contamination within the tube.
If I were to make representations to you that upon collection of the sample and transport to the police department, it was transported from the collection site in a patrol car to a police station and placed in an evidence locker, is that a concern for you?
Yes, because evidence lockers are not refrigerated. So also, I don't know who, there's no chain of custody from where it started from being originally drawn until it made it to the lab.
And did
So I
you,
don't know who touched that.
and did you hear the state's experts say, hey, the chain of custody form I get starts when it comes to me?
Correct.
Okay, is that probably right?
Yes, because she doesn't know what happened before she got it.
We're not implying anything nefarious upon the lab, are we?
No,
Simply saying there's a problem prior.
correct.
Okay. Now, can you explain to the jury what occurs with the blood sample left at room temperature for 9 days in an evidence locker?
Well, if it is contaminated with Candida albicans, it is more than likely 100% going to produce fermented or ferment ethanol in that tube. Essentially, Candida albicans is a yeast. So what's happening is the yeast is eating the sugar within the blood, fermenting, producing alcohol. And for that to happen, you need a warm, moist environment, which by not refrigerating, you are providing everything it needs to produce that alcohol.
Improper handling of evidence, isn't it?
Correct.
It doesn't. It doesn't preserve the evidence in the form that it was collected in.
Correct.
Is there any concern with the sample that goes from room temperature to refrigeration back to room temperature?
There's not really a concern as long as it's handled properly and not kept out for, more than 3 to 4 hours at a time.
Now, with respect to the state's expert's testimony regarding her handling of the sample, did you have any criticism or complaint regarding her handling?
No.
As far as the collection procedure, do you have a concern about a sample being collected 3 to 3.5 hours after an arrest?
I don't necessarily have a concern with that, as long as the collection is done properly.
Is it indicative, or the sample indicative of blood contents of the sample 3.5 hours later, indicative of the blood alcohol at the time of operation of the vehicle?
No, it's not.
State's expert said, I checked to see if it was clotted or green. Is that the anticoagulant that would allow it to clot?
Correct.
Okay, that's not what we're concerned about, the anticoagulant, are we?
No, we're concerned about the sodium chloride.
Okay, what is the green hue we are concerned about?
That can also be microbial growth. It could also be medication interference. There's a lot of things that could cause it to be green, just the specimen is degraded in itself.
As you sit here today with your expertise and your training, do you have legitimate concerns and questions about the accuracy of this testimony? You can have to read that, you can hold that.
I do have concerns that this sample is contaminated, and that this result is not a valid result.
Essentially, we don't know what the condition of the vials were in transport.
Correct.
We know that they were transported in a vehicle for some period of time in August.
Yes,
That in itself is problematic.
yes, it is.
And then the handling of the sample, we know nothing about.
Correct.
That's problematic.
Yes,
The 9 days it sits in the evidence locker is problematic.
that is probably the biggest problematic problem, yes.
You heard the state's expert say it's okay in room temperature. Is practice room temperature or is practice refrigeration?
Practice is refrigeration. That is the standard. That sample should be refrigerated if they're not able to be tested within 4 to 6 hours.
It should be refrigerated within 4 to 6 hours.
Correct.
And if I represent to you, there's been no evidence put forward at this time regarding any refrigeration of the sample while at the police department. While it sat there for 9 days, what does that tell you?
The sample is definitely not a valid sample to test.
Thank you, ma'am. And therefore, we can't rely on the results that are represented in the state's file.
Correct.
That's the way this thing.
Mr. Hill?
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, Ms. Cisco.
Hi.
So do you know exactly what temperature would cause the preservative or the vacuum seal in the tube lid to fail?
I don't know exactly at what temperature. I have seen tubes that have been subjected to high heat and then back to below normal room temperatures that has caused issues within the tubes, yes.
So you're a medical lab scientist at Christian St. Elizabeth Hospital.
Yes,
So have you ever worked at Jefferson County Crime Lab?
no, I have not.
Okay, so, you heard testimony that, that they get these, tubes from various departments daily.
Correct.
You're not aware of, exactly what their procedures are for storage, but, there was some, testimony that you heard, correct?
Correct.
You weren't there personally to witness it? Or
Witness.
to witness the storage of the samples in this case?
No, I just have to rely on what I was told or given in information.
And you never saw the tubes that are in State Exhibit 3 before today either?
No, I have not.
Have you ever worked with GPD or Groves Police Department?
I have not.
Okay. Are you personally aware of their, of how they store these samples whenever they collect them?
I'm assuming they store them like most other departments in an evidence locker.
Um, You would agree with Ms. Altamirano that room temperature storage is acceptable for blood samples?
For very limited amounts of times, yes.
Could upon viewing a sample, could a lab technician, know that it's an abnormal sample?
Not without further testing, no.
And were you ever asked to test the blood in this case?
I was not asked, no, sir.
Okay. Can you testify to anything specific about the blood sample in this case?
As far as what?
As far as whether, let's say, for example, whether there was, microbial contamination?
I cannot testify.
So you can't say that that this sample was actually contaminated in any way?
I can't say 100% that it was contaminated. I can say it is my expert opinion that it was contaminated based off of the evidence that I was given.
But you don't have personal knowledge, but,
I don't have a way to test it, no.
no further questions.
Mr. Crocker?
The information you based your opinion on provided by the state, was it not?
Yes, it was.
You aware of the Texas Forensic Science Commission?
I am.
And are they a regulatory body here in the state of Texas?
Yes, they are.
And they govern matters regarding scientific issues in the courts?
Yes.
Okay. At any point in time has there been an issue with these particular blood vials?
Yes, there has been. There was a recall done because there was no preservatives in the tubes.
Okay. Now, as I understand it, that recall was for tubes that had gray caps,
Correct.
and stage 3 has green caps.
Okay.
Okay. Now, simply trying to point out that even when these things come from the manufacturers, they're not guaranteed, are they?
No, they're not.
In fact, a regulatory body previously had to take these vials out of the stream of circulation. They don't use them.
Correct.
Presumably after years of people complaining about them.
Yes.
Yes, witness.
Mr. Hill?
So you examined the blood valves in stage 3?
I looked at the outer tube itself. I have not looked at the inside tube, no.
Okay. Any further questions for this one?
Okay. Mr. Crocker?
Your Honor, I have no further witnesses or no further questions.
Okay, may this witness be excused?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Crocker? Okay. And you may be excused. You can stay available just in case any of the other attorneys would like to give you a call. Okay? At this time, ladies and gentlemen, the court is going to take a 10-minute recess or 15-minute recess. You can follow the bailiff. Court will be in recess. You may be seated. Jefferson County Court, Law number 2 is back in session. The court is in session. The calls numbers M331242 and calls number M331244. Both cases in the style of state of Texas versus Matthew Joseph Bailey. Let the record reflect that Mr. Bailey is present in court with his attorney, Attorney Glenn Crocker. Let the record also reflect that the state is present with Assistant District Attorneys Andrew Hoover and Attorney Sarah Staub. Let the record reflect that the jury is now present and seated in the courtroom. State, are you ready?
State's ready, Your Honor.
Defense, are you ready?
It's ready, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Crocker, you may proceed.
Your Honor, at this time, we rest.
Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the jury, the state and the defense have rested. Well, before we go on to state, do you have any rebuttal testimony?
State has
No rebuttal testimony. So ladies and gentlemen, the jury, the state has rested and the defense has rested. And so therefore, the court has to prepare what we call a charge. We will have what is called a charge conference. And after the charge conference, then we will have the reading of the charge and the closing arguments, and then the case will be submitted to you. Okay. Now the charge conference, it's nowhere for the court to know how long that is going to be, and so we're just going to recess right now. You can go back out into the hallway now. If it gets close to 12 noon, we'll take a lunch break and let you all go to lunch. If not, if we're able to get everything done prior to that, then we'll basically, let me look at the time and determine whether or not if we're able to get a closing argument and get the case to you before 12, and then we could take a lunch break. Okay? All right. Will everyone please stand? The jury exit the courtroom with the bailiff. You may be seated.